Hi everyone! In today's video, I am going to be drawing these spring peas using colored pencils. Several years ago, I drew some spring peas. This was way back before I started recording my process or posting tutorials or anything like that. And for a long time now, I have wanted to redraw these or draw a similar composition. And so that is what I came up with here. You can see me getting started on one of the little pink flowers that are all over this composition. I decided to draw all of the flowers first, and then I came back through and drew the leaves and the vine, and then finally I drew the actual peas. I was working on Legion Rising Museum Mount Board 2-ply white, and I was using a combination of pencils, Prismacolor, Polychromos, Luminance, Derwent Lightfast, and Holbein pencils. And I blended everything using Utrecht Nude odorless paint thinner, and I applied the paint thinner using just these pointed Q-tips. So when I say I used all those different brands of pencils, that doesn't mean that I used full sets or 20 pencils from each brand. In some cases I was only using 1 or 2 pencils from each of these brands. But for the pink flower specifically, I was using hot pink, process red, and pomegranate from Prismacolor. I used a lot of the azalea from Holbein, and I was using magenta from Lightfast. That was the pencil I used in the shadow areas. And then just a few other colors. You can see me working on the little tops there. I was using some Holbein pencils, chartreuse, apple green, leaf green. I was using Prismacolor chartreuse and also an apple green from Prismacolor. That can get confusing when I'm using different brands but the same names, but I will tell you that they're quite different. When you're going to substitute colors, don't just look at the name and substitute based, apple Prismacolor is very different from apple Holbein, and a lot of times there's a better match with a different name in those sets, so something to keep in mind. But if you want to draw something like this yourself, you definitely don't need all of these different brands. You can just pick the closest colors you have, within the sets that you already own. I like to mix and match on some of these more advanced drawings that I do and just take advantage of the colors that I have and the characteristics of the different pencils. But this could definitely be drawn with just a single brand of colored pencils. For each of these flowers, I started out by creating an outline using that Lightfast pencil from Magenta. Then I blocked in the contour lines. Then I used a white pencil to protect the paper where I wanted to make sure some highlights would show through. Then I came through with the mid-tone pink colors like the hot pink, the process red, and the azalea. And then I darkened the shadows in some places. In a couple cases, I even used Mars Black from Derwent Lightfast to make those shadows really nice and dark. I did want a good amount of contrast in there. And after that, I blended everything with solvent and then came back through, went back over everything, added details, made sure everything looked really nice and smooth. You'll also see me using an electric eraser. That is to brighten the highlights and also to add texture in a few places. That's part of the technique that I typically use. When you use the electric eraser, you're not necessarily trying to bring the paper back to white. So I'm not like trying to erase something up. I'm using it to pull up a few layers of the pencil so that the colors that come on top will stick better. So particularly that's helpful in those highlight areas. One of the things that I pointed out when I was talking in the tutorial for this drawing, some of these flowers look a little bit wonky, and one of the things that I decided to do was just trust the reference image. Sometimes when you're working this way, where I'm going to be putting the leaves and the vines in later, these initial flowers can look a little bit odd. So once all of the leaves and vines and everything go in and around all of this, then they're going to make a lot more sense. So trust that reference image. If you're happy with the way the reference looks overall, then you just want to draw what you see there. In most cases, sometimes I make changes. Finishing out these flowers before I get started on the leaves and vines. Now, the leaves and vines were the most challenging part of this piece just because there's such a tangle going on up in here. And what I discovered was the easiest way for me to draw these were to draw the vines in first and then try to work the leaves in and around them, because the vines just created a sort of border. And that's not going to make the drawing look better or anything like that. It's just to make it easier for me to puzzle out. When you're working on something like this, a lot of times it does feel like you are working on a puzzle. And I'm just trying to fill in piece by piece. I also used an indenting technique using a really sharp white polychromos pencil and also an embossing tool to create some indentations for the veins in the leaves, and also just to create some more separation between the different leaves. And then a couple more ways that I created separation in there were with the values. So I made sure I had some really dark darks, and I also used a few different colors. So again, I mentioned I had the chartreuse colors, which are really bright. Then I had a leaf green and May green that were nice warm hues. And then I had some brighter colors like a spring green from Luminance and an apple green from Prisma. Those were a bit cooler and just a little more neutral. So having some variation in the leaves and vines, so using those techniques like the indenting technique, using some strong values, using a few different colors, those are ways that I can prevent this from looking like just a big green blob there in the center of the drawing. It looks like there's some separation. You can see the vines, you can see the leaves, they're distinct from one another. Finally, here I'm starting to work on the peas, and these were the easiest part of the drawing. I just Outlined them, added the shadows and highlights, came over with some mid-tone colors, blended until it was smooth, and then came back through and added a few details, but those were really easy, the easiest part of the drawing. If you like this drawing but it's moving way too fast, you can check out the tutorial that I have over on Patreon. I've got a 5-part tutorial with lots of real-time sections, lots of tips, and you can check that out if you're interested. And that is it for this one. Thanks for watching. Bye.